the distinct pleasure of introducing a very, very good friend, a friend from my, there we go. Hang on. Can you turn your mic off for just a second? Thanks. There we go. A friend of our alumni graduating class in seminary. And also, yes, I did ask her for her bio. This was a will you do it this weekend kind of situation. So I am going to get her bio for you. Okay, even though I know her quite well. Laurie is an ordained spiritualist minister from the School of Healing and Prophecy in New York. She is an RN, has an MA in communication disorders. She is a Reiki master and therapeutic touch practitioner. She works as a medium and a healer. Her question, why spiritualism? Spiritualism encompasses the core belief system that I've experienced in my life: spiritual communication and spiritual healing. I also have a high regard for spiritual principles of responsibility, both in being responsible for one's own actions and creating one's life. I have to tell you, there is so much more to Laurie, but mum's the word. And she is here this week in Lilydale, so I thought I would lasso her in and sit at the dining room table. So without further ado, I would love you to welcome Laurie to speak. Laurie, you can take it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It is my privilege and honor to be here today. I just noticed with this setup, I did write some notes, so I may be looking away back and forth. But I think it's going to be a great time. So initially, when I was working on a topic of what to speak about today, of course, I took a moment with Spirit and I was told appreciation. So I'm going to talk about appreciation. And while this was all occurring and I wrote down notes and then I, came to Lilydale, I had a bunch of moments of synchronicity. So I'm going to include those little instances as well. And actually, the first one was when I was reading through Tina Zion's book, awesome book, Becoming a Medical Intuitive. And she was explaining about how our positive and negative emotions affect our heart. So I read, and I quote, "The heart sends out smooth rhythms when a person feels appreciation. It sends out jagged and chaotic rhythms when a person feels frustrated." So, that really just made me appreciate appreciation. The more we have that in our life, we are, making our bodies healthier. So then I also started to think about things that I appreciate and things that can be appreciated even during hardship and hard times. And yes, COVID came to mind, and we all know that COVID was hell. We know that it is still continuing, but if nothing else, living through COVID has provided for us an opportunity to focus on our inner work and realize who and what we appreciate in our life. So in this regard, I began to think about our healthcare workers, especially during the heart of COVID. We have these people who are dealing with uncertainty, burnout, facing death every single day. So as Tim Rishka told you, I'm an RN. I have basically retired from that. I do a lot of volunteer work, but hearing these challenges that are occurring now with my friends and, fellow nurses kind of brought back to me a similar, but certainly not the same situation that I faced when I was a new graduate. I will tell you, it was in the 80s. And stop laughing, Tamarishka. And so, this was regarding the time of the AIDS crisis. And back then, it wasn't called AIDS. And we didn't know how it was transmitted. There's really only one thing that we knew. We knew that if you got it, you were dead. That was basically it. So I worked in a small hospital in Cooperstown in New York. And then all of a sudden we started getting these patients from New York City, with this virus. And like I said, we didn't know how it was transmitted. We would wear a hat, mask, gown, everything to take care of these patients. And then I was faced with a quandary of having staff come to me and refusing to care for these patients. And I remember okay, I didn't learn about this in nursing school. It was just like a big puzzlement, but it was also understandable because you really didn't know if you were going to make it out alive. So remembering that fear, going through COVID, again, like I say, I have a great appreciation for healthcare staff who have unselfishly risked their lives. And as they knew, they were risking the lives of their family as well. And another topic of appreciation that came to me instantly was regarding teachers. Or at least maybe, one very, very special teacher in our lives. Obviously I would have to say that I've had inspirational teachers and mentors, but today I want to talk about one teacher that was very special to me. This was a high school teacher. That was just a few years ago. Just joking. So I get a couple laughs there. Good, thank you. There's more to come. So anyway, this teacher was my high school English teacher, and her name was Mrs. Adler. And so now we're ready for a moment of synchronicity. So yesterday in Lilydale, I was at a workshop, and this woman started to talk about Reverend Wendling. Now, Randy and Tamarishka will know that our director at fellowships, Elaine Thomas, her great mentor and teacher was Reverend Wendling. Oh, I'm getting a chill. And so, after we had a break, I went over to this woman and I said, oh my gosh, tell me about her. And we had this wonderful talk, and at the end of the talk, I said, what's your name? And she said, Sharon Adler, my teacher, Mrs. Adler. So I was like, wow. So that was very awesome. So my Mrs. Adler, I appreciated her as a teacher, and I appreciate her now. And you'll get that when I tell you the story. So going back just a few years, like I said, in my teenage times, and like a lot of people, difficult time being a teenager. But for me, one of the ways that I coped with everything was I escaped through reading and books. And, Mrs. Adler was my English teacher during my senior year. So she taught us things I knew nothing about, like symbolism, which was amazing. And she also shared personal stories about herself. They were appropriate, of course, but it was like other teachers didn't do that kind of thing. So then it came to the end of the school year. And she did this special thing where she would give each student a book that she had bought for them. And I was kind of secretly, I didn't want people to know, but I was very excited about this because, I wondered what she would pick out for me. I didn't really know anything about intuitive abilities, but I kind of sensed that, she had this way of picking out a special book. So finally the day comes and she comes over to me and she hands me a book. Now, other people she had like said little things about, but you know, that's okay. So she gives me this book and I looked at it and my heart kind of sank. So I'll tell you about the book. It was a blue book and it had a statue on it. And I'm going to show you what the book was. See if you can, I don't know, can they see this all right? The name of the book is Siddhartha. So I want to see how many of you are familiar with Siddhartha. Do we have any Siddharthians here today? Anybody's read Siddhartha? And if not, that's fine. I'll tell you about it obviously and how this kind of all ties in, because I got this book, I didn't know what it was. And you know, I kind of thought like, you know how sometimes when you order a lot of books and then you get one free. So that maybe she just kind of, you know, got this book free and gave it to me. So here is a summary quote about the book. Quote, "The theme of the novel is the search for self-realization by a young Brahmin, Siddhartha. Realizing the contradictions between reality and what he has been taught, he abandons the comfortable life to wander." So like I say, I read the book, you know, I didn't really get a lot out of it the first time I read it, kind of put it away. But now we have another moment of synchronicity. So on my journey here to Lilydale this time, I was going to be linking up with another spiritualist minister. Her name is Colleen. And I told her I would be doing this talk and she wanted to know what it was going to be about. And I kind of didn't want to tell her, but I did. I just said, oh, you know, I'm going to talk about this book, Siddhartha. She goes, oh my God, I can't believe you're telling me that because I'm doing a book club. And our first book is Siddhartha. So I was like, okay, Siddhartha's in the air. But there was more. So she and her husband drove up to Lilydale. And when they got here, she said, I have a story for you. So they were on the road and Colleen noticed this man with a big backpack walking by. And she turned to her husband and she said, you know, we need to pick this guy up. And he's like, I can't pull off the road right now. We're going to get in an accident, you know, forget it. So they went to the next gas station. The man was there, gave him a ride. Long story short, he was in training to become a monk. And part of his mission, you know, was to preach and lecture. And so they listened to him and probably the third sentence out of his mouth had to do with Siddhartha. So it just can't, like I say, it's an awesome thing that, you know, can't seem to get away from. So I'm enjoying all of that. And like I said, over the years, I would read, when I would be contemplating, I would read Siddhartha again. I would follow his journey from in the beginning where he has everything and then he ends up with nothing. And eventually he ends up spending his days sitting down by the river. Here's just one more quote. Listening to the river, Siddhartha realizes that time is an illusion and that all his feelings and experiences, even those of suffering, are a part of a great and ultimately jubilant fellowship of all things connected in the cylindrical unity of nature. I like that, cylindrical unity of nature. So back to COVID, the lockdown days. And I was very fortunate. I did have time to focus on my inner work and reflect. And I was blessed to get a campsite at a campground. I got the last one. And every morning I started my day the same way. I would wake up, I would plug in the coffee pot, I would get the dogs, I would go down to the lake, I would sit, I would meditate and appreciate the flowing water and the grandeur of nature. And it was during one of these moments, luckily I was by myself, I just started laughing like hysterically because it just kind of came to me. It was like, oh my gosh, this is like me, Mrs. Adler, Siddhartha. That's what he would do at the end of the book. He was down meditating at the river for like the rest of his life. So, I mean, I'm not obviously the same as Siddhartha. He reached enlightenment, but I did feel the similarity and the coming together with this book. So like I say, there was a feeling in that moment of coming full circle. So I'm just going to conclude by saying sometimes, as with isolation, we are forced into an opportunity of focus where we can appreciate things that may have never been brought to our attention before. We appreciate like-minded people we meet on our path and those that are following the same path. And sometimes we don't instantly appreciate things until we experience a slow burn with them later in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. It's interesting, the synchronicities, because I ended up meeting you this week. And where were you? In my living room, on the sofa. Was it that week? You were sitting in the living room and you're going, yeah, sure, I'll be there. But it was like, I'm at a loss trying to find somebody to speak, and I couldn't find anybody, and everybody's booked here. Laurie comes in for a visit, sits down, there's my speaker. And I thought this was great. And then the other thing I thought of when you were talking, I'm not looking away at you, I'm looking at Laurie. Laurie, by the way, she's sitting to my right.
Should I unmute or no?
No, it's okay because we'll get the echo.
Okay, yeah.
Is Buddha. If any of you want something interesting to read, even if it's just online Googling about Buddha. Because, oh, you can hear from my mic. Okay, perfect. They can still hear you. Perfect.
Oh, good.
Because Buddha gave up his wealth. He was a prince. And he gave up his wealth for poverty to experience a life in its purest form. Because what he was living, he believed was not life. And he couldn't understand the people that he was, in essence, royalty for, unless he lived as them. And it's an amazing story. It's a beautiful story. There's a lot of, let's say, fables or little Oriental stories about him and how he came to be who he was. And it's pretty incredible. So next we have, so thank you, Laurie. That was wonderful. Very inspiring. And that synchronicity thing.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, it's amazing. So I'm